This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Steadman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Not so bad. Yourself?
I'm doing well. I mean, I'm going on vacation next week, so yay for vacation. But, and I think everybody can probably relate to this. The week before vacation and the week after vacation is like hell on earth in terms of your work life. You've got to get everything done before vacation, then you come back and it's like your inbox has 1,000 emails or whatever. But as you know, I live in Augusta, Georgia. It's Masters Week. We're the center of the world's attention for 1 week out of the year. And that's next week. So I'm looking forward to it. And damn the stress.
Well, there's no such thing as vacation, I think, on kind of a job that you and I have. It's just periods of work. You're hitting pause on it. Doesn't mean the work disappeared while you're gone. And you'll spend some time catching up.
Yeah, but I'm going to spend the week like doing all kinds of yard work and things that I don't have time to do the rest of the year or the other weeks. I feel like weekends, you have to have at least one day to do something fun or your life just goes by and you do nothing. Like, I just can't stand spending my whole weekend going to the store and doing laundry and X, Y, and Z and spending your whole weekend and you've done nothing fun. So I feel like you have to do one thing fun. So I never get to things like, updating the flower bed and stuff like that.
I can imagine. Updating the flower bed, that's not something that I normally picture you doing.
It's not something I normally would do, but Denise and I are going to go to the nursery and buy stuff because I've only been in this house for like 2 years and basically the entire flower bed died, which I don't know how that happened. I think they bought all kind of like low-end plants to get it ready to sell, and they probably didn't put a lot of effort into planting them, and they probably just sat and, never rooted, etc. So anyway, my flower bed is just like, in the South you use pine straw rather than wood chips because we have like termites. Termites is a major issue in the South. So you use this pine straw, and basically my flower beds are pine straw with nothing coming out of it.
That sounds real attractive. Well, good luck to you and your fun vacation, in quotes. We're going to have a couple conferences going to be at. Those aren't vacations, but those are fun, right?
They're fun. They're like work vacations.
Yeah. You want to tell us about Identiverse?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always excited about Identiverse. We're going to have a lot going on there. We're going to have a couple of events, which I'm not ready to announce, but there'll be opportunities to interact with us, maybe see us put on the podcast in kind of a live setting. And for those people who haven't registered yet, we're going to have a link in the show notes, but essentially you can go to identiverse.com and use their discount code, which is IDV24-IDAC25. So you can go, and there's still like a version of Early Bird. The price hasn't gone to the maximum amount, I think near the end of April. So don't take my word for the exact date. I thought it was like April 26th. But if you missed the date for early bird pricing, don't say, Jim McDonald, gave us this misinformation, so I want a discount. That ain't happening. You need to go out there and check for yourself. The conference is, I can get this part right for sure. The conference is May 28th through the 31st. Is at the Aria in Las Vegas, which I love Las Vegas. I mean, I don't gamble. I do drink a little bit, but I'm not like, I don't go crazy. I know it's Sin City, but I don't go there and like sin extravagantly, but I do have a good time. I mean, the food is great. I know you're real into the people watching. I like doing that as well. And I just have a good time overall.
Yeah, the people and the food. I like that. That should be like your tagline. I don't sin extravagantly. That's the motto for the podcast.
Yeah, I don't sin extravagantly, but that doesn't mean I don't sin at all.
So we'll have that link in a show note. IDV24-IDAC25 is 25% off. Then right after that, I know a lot of people are hopping on a plane, basically going straight from there over to Europe, and Berlin specifically, for the European Identity and Cloud Conference. So our friends over at Kubner Cole have given us a discount as well. EIC24, IDAC25 gets you 25% off. Unfortunately, Jim and I won't be there this year, but we hope to make it next year. I think that's kind of on our bucket list. We've been talking about that for a while, but it would be cool to go to that finally after I feel like 2 or 3 years now of us talking about it.
I think one of the other cool things that we should point out is that for the years that we've been doing this podcast, we've always been, I think the listeners of the podcast have been weighted more towards the United States. And now we are actually a majority of listeners outside of the United States, which I think is super cool. And I think we always try to remember that there's so many people listening who are not in the United States, and I don't think we always nail it. Sometimes we forget, and we have our U.S.-centric statements. It's not anything intentional, of course. It's just it's just a matter of convenience, if you will. But yeah, a lot of people, that conference is probably right in their backyard.
Yeah, easy to get to, but yeah, that's something we want to get to next year. And then speaking of worldwide, we've got Identity Week coming up later this year. There's Europe, which is June 11th and 12th in Amsterdam. America, September 11th and 12th in Washington, D.C. That's where you and I will be at. And then Asia is October 22nd, 23rd in Singapore. If you use the code IDAC30, 30% off. And that code works for all of those conferences, which is super cool. So I know you and I are looking forward to the one in DC, and we'll be doing podcasting things there. And I think I'm supposed to host like a panel. Don't know what we're going to talk about or with who yet, but we'll make it work.
I'd be more excited actually to go to the one in Europe and in Singapore. I've never been to Singapore, but I really want to fly first class if we go, or at least business class.
We have to get a few more sponsors, I think, for that. So if you want to sponsor an episode of the podcast, hit our website. All right, let's talk Turkey, or cloud in this case. I want to welcome to the show, her first time on it, Kat Traxler. She's a security researcher at TrustOnCloud. Welcome to the show, Kat.
Hey guys, and hey everybody, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for making an appearance with us. You're currently holding either Lump or Yawn, I'm not sure which, on your lap. One of your two dachshunds.
Yeah, I have Mr. Lump here. He was whining to get on my lap, so if we don't want to hear him whining through the entire episode, I think it's best I just hold him.
Well, I'm a dog fan, and I think dogs are the best people, so I'm totally okay with that. We're not doing video for this episode, so people just have to take my word for it that is one adorable puppy on your lap. Let's talk about, though, your identity background, because one of the things we do when we have someone on for the first time is really kind of understand how did they get into the identity space. So tell us a little bit about sort of how you got up into this, area. Is it something that you chose, or did it choose you?
Very much the latter. I have a background in application development and then web app pen testing. That was my initial pivot into security. And a number of years ago, kind of in that realm of internal white box testing, one of the large testing projects I was able to do was a white box test of a new IDP. My employer was looking to switch IDPs and needed to have an independent look at the on-prem systems, the connections, the configurations and assertions that we were going to be creating. And my memory has it that I probably spent 6 months tearing this thing apart. And, it was that experience that really showed me the impact that identity had across a major enterprise and kind of got me into becoming this, I guess you could say identity junkie, right? But it was really more of like an impact junkie. Like I wanted to work on systems that had the most impact to my customers and to my employers. And that was just like identity, clearly. Having been, so deep inside of an IDP and seen the guts and glory of it. From there, I knew that if I wanted to be like have impactful work, it was going to be centered in identity.
And you've got a lot of, pans in the fire, as we like to say, a lot of stuff that you work on. You've got your own consulting firm, Nanook Security. You're working with TrustOnCloud now as a security researcher. You also do work with SANS Institute, IONS, DEF CON. I mean, tell me about some of the other, I don't want to call them extracurricular activities, but tell me the other things that you kind of work on and help me kind of understand, as second part of that question, what does a security researcher do?
It's like a really, really good question. It's so broad. What does the security researcher do? And that explanation is going to be different from 10 different researchers you talk to. But I like to think of it like I take complex amorphous systems and try to break them down to their essential parts. And through that process, try to identify the security weaknesses typically at the joints where two trust boundaries meet, where two systems interact. So it's that process of distilling and really like fully understanding that within a complex system, there is no magic. If you can say there's no magic in here, it all is understandable if you want to distill it to its essential parts. That's ultimately like what research is trying to distill it to its essential parts and then understand where you have, security relevant issues. I might stumble across a lot of bugs here and there, but determining whether or not it's security relevant is kind of like a unique skill to have. What ticketing system do you submit this to? Do you submit this to a general public issue tracker where everybody can see because it's like not security relevant and, hey, fix this? Or do you submit it to this like private bug bounty where it should be kept confidential? So yeah, that's what I do in my day job with TrustOnCloud. The work product is threat models, GCP services specifically, where ultimately there is a diagram of all of the flows and interactions of the service, and then a list of all of the threats I've enumerated, and then all of the controls. I do similar work. I have done similar work with past employers. With SANS, I wrote a course, the SEC 549 Enterprise Cloud Security Architecture course. Less threat focused, more just like what are the overarching controls. A lot of identity. Surprise, surprise, big identity course. What was the other thing? Oh, DEF CON, right. For years, I've helped run the local DEF CON chapter here. So everybody knows there's the big DEF CON Vegas thing. I personally hate Vegas. It's torture for me being there. But there's also these like local chapters in every community that meet, and I've helped run that for many years. I think that covers some of the extracurricular stuff. Yeah.
Now I feel like you need to defend Vegas, but I'm not going to. You form your opinion, I'll form my opinion. We can still be friends. But I did have a follow-up on the security researcher thing, which is like what drives people to become security researchers or do the kind of research and get these, find these 0 days and things like that. My understanding is, okay, there can be bounties that are paid. And then the other is like street cred. Like I found this 0 day and like I can become famous as a security researcher. But since you brought it up, I mean, what is the motivation?
I mean, those are two of them. Also, there's also the do good part, that just we want systems more secure. That's definitely a factor. I'm working on a project now that because of the kind of research it is, I won't get any bounty. Might not actually get any street cred of it. But if it works out, it's actually going to be really impactful for people and secure a lot of systems in the future. So you're always balancing those three and like, you do it because you're just like insatiably curious, and you try to just balance that between, having a life and enjoying non-tech things and not have it take over your life. But I know when people first start out, it can really be consuming. Just this insatiable curiosity of systems and trying to break them and understand them and dissect them.
Yeah, definitely got the sense that that's a big motivator for you from the different things that I've seen you do on like YouTube and things like that. And, one of the things that attracted us to ask you to be on the show was that, you're in this IAM space, but you're also focused on the cloud. You kind of spend a lot of time on GCP, Google's cloud, a lot of time on AWS. And I'm just going to start with kind of like one of the questions I think every identity practitioner has either faced or is facing now as they're transitioning, having to manage, on-premise environments and having to manage cloud environments from an IAM perspective. And I'm wondering, the investments that we've made over time in IAM tools, can the same tools that we bought for on-prem be used for the cloud? Is it black and white, you need different tools, or is there some kind of like gray area?
I will have the most, probably frustrating answer in saying maybe you need new tools. So I think that's like the holy grail, right? Like I have this permission catalog that stood up in my enterprise, and like, can't I just like put all of my AWS roles in here and then have those roles be auto-assigned to the people and then deprovisioned after a time? And that's all, I think, possible. Some of the big vendors are incorporating it, but I think it's not a natural externalization of cloud concepts. I think like what's natural to externalize from the cloud is authentication. So like you can naturally, externalize your to your IDP. And you can naturally externalize to, say, your group memberships and have those carried through over, SAML authentication. But when it comes to your like roles and your authorization, that's a harder nut to crack. And I think there's just less kind of all-in-one tooling around it. When I say all-in-one, I mean like it'll handle all of your, on-prem privileged assignments and your in the cloud, developer roles. There's just less all-in-one tooling for authorization because it's a harder thing to externalize. It's so bespoke to every cloud, and it's just such a thing that's baked into every cloud is their authorization concepts.
See, I think this is why I wanted to get you onto the show, because I didn't even feel like I asked the question well, but your answer was perfect and exactly what I was looking for. You really focused in on kind of the core technologies of identity, from the on-prem world. There are a couple other technologies that you didn't touch on that I'd like to throw them out there and just kind of get your take and whether or not, like, how much value you see in them. And the first one I'm going to touch on is, kind of built for the cloud, the space called CIEM or CIEM, Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management. What's your take on that?
I mean, those folks are trying to solve like the huge problem of both least privilege and trying to time box privilege assignments around, doing that just in time. I mean, my take is that it's a massively hard problem to solve. At some point, when you're large enough and you have a large enough enterprise, bringing some of that tooling in makes sense. It's probably not going to be the same tooling, though, as your on-prem permission catalog. That's why they have that whole CIEM space.
Yeah. It's like I said, built for the cloud, and I think a lot of people are determining whether whether or not they need to be spending money on that. The next one is kind of more traditional on-prem tool, privileged access management, or PAM, and kind of it's always been to me like a bunch of capabilities kind of put together in terms of what they call PAM. But I'm just wondering, like, when you talk about like traditional PAM technology, say like a CyberArk or Beyond Trust or the Delinea suite, like, is that the place to start? Is that the place to build your privileged access management for the cloud?
Likely not. No. I mean, the CyberArk people will probably, shake their fists at me, but I don't see that I haven't seen that it's moving at the speed that folks need. And I'm thinking about like the usages of CyberArk being this, I'm going to every day vend you this privileged user. And it's going to be vended out to a small handful of your sysadmins, your DAs. But now in the cloud, who has, I'll use air quotes, privilege? Like all your developers, like so many people. So maybe the first thing to do is to figure out how to have, instead of having 500 developers needing privilege, maybe the first thing to do is to try to figure out how to have zero-touch production where nobody actually is logging into that system. Like the ways that the cloud and privilege identity has evolved has been different than it evolved 20 years ago in like the on-prem systems, to where I don't know that your traditional PAM vendors shoehorn in great.
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer to this, or my feeling on this, has to do with how you went to the cloud. If your approach was like, let's lift and shift our internal environment, and you're doing little virtualization or little infrastructure as code, then maybe it's just a bunch of servers that you are renting from someone else, and that model would work. I don't think it's going to really help you too much for your console. But in terms of like, hey, we're not doing any kind of automated management of these server instances, and that's what our cloud happens to be, then I think, yes, traditional PAM probably would work in that model. But if you're doing a lot of automation, you're using a lot of service accounts, and you're using Docker and things like that, I mean, it starts to chip away at what value kind of extending that privileged access management would bring to securing your cloud.
I think how much effort might go into deploying a PAM solution, say for like your server instances, right? I worry that somebody might end up missing the forest for the trees, because even if you have, say a lift and shift style fleet of IaaS, and that's really all you're using, you're missing the entire control plane, which is your most juicy target. You might spend a ton of effort securing these SSH credentials, or just securing this like one jump host ingress, but you've completely missed your entire control plane.
That's right. That's what I was calling it, the console, but it's really more the control plane.
Yeah. Yeah, which just comes along for the ride, really, no matter what.
Why do you think that those privileged access management tools are kind of missing the mark there? Is it just, it's very hard for a third-party product to, manage that in a more secure way than kind of comes out of the box? Or
I just think it comes down to like when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. They've had a very successful business doing this thing, and how do they appear to have coverage for this new thing? They have a hammer. Let's try to make the hammer work in some way.
So the last group of technology that I really wanted to bounce off you was monitoring technology, SIEM, and the new cousin, ITDR. Do you need to enhance the monitoring of the cloud with external products, or use what is kind of built into the cloud?
All right, you got to help me out here. ITDR. What's
Identity Threat Detection and Response.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So my previous employer, I probably did that. We called it CDR, Cloud Detection Response. And maybe this is just an evolving Gartner term. Right. So yes, do we need new things? Yeah. So you're going to have the same problems with monitoring that, folks in the SOC have always had, which is this data normalization issue. But you're going to have it times 10, because you're going to have audit logs from likely 3 different clouds. You're going to have additional system logs from a number of different IaaS and SaaS services. So with all of these logs comes a ton of need for data normalization. And then what do you do with them? Do you dump them in your Splunk and start adding extra zeros to your checks? That's an option that people do, and they start cross-correlating just in one big central location. Or do you do the thing that says, I want to gain insights, I will use air quotes again, insights at the edge, which means that you find the uniqueness and you find the badness and you monitor in those clouds using cloud native monitoring technologies, likely from the CSPs, because they have the insights as to what uniquely you need to look for in that specific cloud. And then you pull not the logs, but you pull the insights to a central location where you can do correlation. Personally, for larger organizations, it really more looks like the latter. So in both cases, you do end up using new technologies, but in the latter solution, you end up using quite a bit more cloud native detection technologies, because you're doing that insights at the edge thing and centralizing only the insights.
We kind of jumped right into a bunch of different technologies, and I want to take a step back a moment, because I think one of the things that, at least that I've discovered myself personally, is GCP, for example, maybe is not as well known as some of the other ones like AWS and Azure and sort of things like that. And I think this is the thing that a lot of people struggle with, is every cloud provider kind of does identity or in security a little bit differently from each other.
Totally, yeah.
I mean, it's like a totally different language, and we're seeing some of these tools pop up where they're like trying to be the Rosetta Stone between all three. And so I can certainly see, some of the cloud posture management, cloud detection response, right? All those things, they're meant to help, but they don't replace true knowledge of how things work, right? I mean, you need to know how this stuff works. What's the best way to pick up and start to learn things like GCP? Because I think you wrote a blog about this, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I put out, a basic one-on-one series on my website several years ago, and I just refreshed it recently. Have you ever had the thing where you go back to things you've written a few years later and you said, "Oh, this is garbage."
Yeah, recorded daily.
Yeah. So that happened recently. I put out the 101 series, I think in 2020, and I went back to it. I was like, oh, this is garbage. And so I rewrote it.
Well, it might not have been garbage at the time, though, right? Isn't this the challenge with any technology, is things change over time and understandings?
Exactly.
And yeah, it's like, okay, well, this is the way it used to be. It's time to update it. I think that's just a natural refresh, right?
Thank you for bolstering my confidence. I remember just, kind of rage updating it. But yeah, no, that's correct. It needed to be refreshed because so much terminology had changed. And then I think the longer you work in a system, the more crisp your understanding becomes. And that's what I really wanted the 101 series to be, was crisp. There's documentation from the cloud providers. You can go to their websites. You can read all about their IAM models. But I didn't see anywhere where it was just like the TLDR, prioritizing brevity, prioritizing, the crispest way you could get your point across, and then breaking them down into these like minimum bite-size pieces. And part of it for me was just this like exercise of like, how few words could I use to give somebody 99% of the picture? How little could I write, as opposed to how much could I write and how much could I tell somebody. I wanted to see how little could I write and still give them a huge piece of the pie. There's still a 201 series that I owe people, but 101 in GCP gets you really far.
So we'll have a link in our show notes to that, Kat Traxler.cloud. I think it's, as of right now, it's like the top thing on the list that I remember seeing. But it is good. And I think there's a real skill and an art form into, you took the word that I was immediately thinking of was brevity, is how do you get to the point quickly, right? Everybody's watched a cooking video where they spend the first half hour talking about the history behind the parchment that they used to write this recipe on. It's like, not just get to the facts. Like, I don't care, right? So I appreciate short bits of content that are direct to the point. Tell me what I need to know. Because guess what? I'm going to come back. I'm going to keep reading. And I feel like if I want to learn more, sure, right? There's other things like that. But sometimes I just love those little bite-sized things. So I'm excited to scan it over and start to get into it, because I think GCP is one of the areas that I personally I don't have really any experience with. It's been all AWS and Azure to date. Do you see GCP growing, shrinking? Is it better suited for maybe certain businesses and certain applications than others? Because I've kind of heard like GCP is great for some things and not as great for other things. But like, where, if I'm out there as an IAM person, like where should I expect to see, oh yeah, we're probably going to be using GCP in that type of context?
Yeah, I mean, whenever I hear of somebody using GCP, I think, are you using it for data science? It's really popular in that respect. It's really popular for its offerings around like Kubernetes and like serverless containerization. It's not as popular for, say, just like workhorse workloads. Like, you need like, some VMs, throw up a load balancer and get a database up. Like, that's really just like your bread and butter AWS stuff. I can't tell you if, GCP would be competitive, would not be competitive. It's just I typically don't see them playing in that space as much. It's more of the big data science area that, if you have GCP, it's in that scenario, which again is very cool, because for me that's impact. That's high impact data that needs to be protected.
So let's give people a kickstart here. What is the most important thing that people should know when they start to look at GCP from an identity perspective?
Well, the one thing that GCP has that is not prevalent in AWS is this resource hierarchy. This concept of a hierarchical model starts at the organization, flows down to folders and projects, and then underneath resources, where each of those kind of points on the hierarchy, those positions, are attachment points for policy. And then policy can then be inherited down the hierarchy. That whole hierarchy inheritance model, characteristic is the most powerful thing in Google Cloud, and it's the thing that people just completely forget. It's the thing that's just not in the forefront of people's minds, especially coming from an AWS background.
Is that something that from your day job as security researcher, you're starting to look at maybe those policies attachments and say, hey, something misconfigured? Is that a valid way or a viable way or a most common way? Like, what are you looking for in those kinds of areas?
Yeah. I mean, that's this is the best way to provide scope, right? To attach grants, to attach permissions at a resource level, provides the scope, tells you how far those permissions can roam. And because it's not in the forefront of people's minds, I think a lot of times things are attached, say, at the project level, which is the equivalent of an AWS account. And that's conflated with the idea of an identity-based policy in AWS, where you're assigning a person a policy and that user lives in an account. So these two contradictory models that actually aren't the same are conflated with each other. And what that results in GCP is over permission, where somebody is provided the ability to, say, administer all compute instances because they have the permission attached at the project level, when it really should be attached at, say, a compute instance. That's actually not a valid example because I don't think you can attach that at the compute instance, but the lowest resource level possible. I'll say, somebody has the ability to administer all buckets because that permission is assigned at the project level, as opposed to really at the very specific bucket that it matters at.
Is there something similar for AWS? Is that on the roadmap? Would you think you would ever tackle something like that, or something already exists that you feel like, I can't really top that?
No, it's this lack of a hierarchy and this lack of policy inheritance was sort of like the part of the AWS original sin. It was the founding and creation of their resource model just never included that. And so what they've had to do over the years is create these mechanisms to kind of create scope. So there's things like permission boundaries, conditionals, and then a handful of resources, have the ability to attach policies at the resource level as opposed to the identity. But now you have a problem. The problem you have is now you have two different competing models. You have the identity-based model, and then you have the resource-based model competing against each other in AWS for supremacy. And so now you have to have all these complex rules about like which one takes precedence in which situation, depending on which resource, and things get very complicated.
Is that the main difference between GCP and AWS, or are there other things? There are a million scenarios in which they are different. However, it all rolls up to the same issue. It all rolls up to the same issue of AWS not having the resource hierarchy, AWS not having the policy inheritance model, and subsequently all of the changes that they've had to make to the original resource model to sort of craft this idea of scoped.
I know we've been talking about IAM so much, and I think that securing the cloud goes well beyond IAM, certainly other areas, certainly other layers. But I even think it kind of starts with having a good asset inventory, knowing what you're protecting. Do you find that kind of that traditional approach to an asset inventory or CMDB that kind of like been popular in the IT space for as long as we've been in the IT space makes sense given the cloud, or is there some kind of shift where it actually has to be looked at differently?
I was thinking about this, about like a cloud asset inventory, because that actually is a very specific service from Google, the cloud asset inventory, knowing, the ability to query what's in your account. I apologize now. I think my dogs are having a field day.
It's the best part of the show so far. No offense to any three of us. It's all good.
I think the mailman's walking around, and so they're running everybody. Fundamentally, and I just love getting to like the philosophical level, like philosophically, like what's the difference between these two things? because it's really easy to have an inventory of your assets in the cloud. The cloud is all programmatic. You can make, a series of API calls, and you can get a deadly accurate list of everything that's in your cloud. Now, what makes that different than your traditional on-prem enterprise asset inventory? Like, I'm thinking like ServiceNow or something, right? Like, there's a ServiceNow that tells you what are all the servers, what are their names, what are their host names, who owns it, yada, yada, yada. The big difference is that we're assuming that list, that classic asset inventory on-prem, we have every reason to assume that that's correct, and that that's what the world should look like. The world should look like these 5 servers with these 5 host names and Bob and Jane from them. When we pull from the cloud and we pull directly from the APIs, we have no context on whether or not this is correct, this is malicious, this is misconfigured in some way. There's no context around whether or not this is good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, I kind of feel like there's also, this debate isn't new for the cloud, but I think, is it exacerbated by the cloud, or that might not be the right word, but the idea around there's logical groupings of things called applications, but then behind the scenes, it's all of these either hardware or services, and then there's different owners and different groupings within. So I think that's always been the challenge, though. I think when everything's a service and everything's logical, it just maybe either exacerbates it or maybe to some extent simplifies it. I'm not sure. But I think that's something that debate won't be solved on this call. But I think
it both simplifies it and complicates it.
I saw you speaking on another podcast, and this has been kind of a hot topic within this identity community around least privilege versus zero standing privilege versus good old role management, over provision roles, if you will. And to me, there's a time and place for all of those. Do you agree with that? Or do you agree with throwing certain things of that stack out the door?
No, I wouldn't throw any of it out the door. It reminds me of Google's cloud maturity roadmap. I think maybe we can include that in the show notes. What they have in that is this, this kind of crawl, walk, run model, and then they describe, it's not actually crawl, walk, run, but say somebody in the cloud is crawling, and they describe, here's all the behaviors that you might be doing if you're, say, crawling. And in that, maybe they are, simply provisioning some very coarse-grained rules. And when they're walking, maybe they're doing some efforts around being privileged around those rules. And then when they're running, maybe they're going and they're doing that zero standing privilege, just in time stuff. But it's like, all of that's valid, but it's about where you are in your cloud maturity life cycle. There's a lot of people process technology to get to that model of we're only going to provision you just amount of access you need for the exact time you need it and then pull it back. There's a lot you need to do to get to that point. So having this privilege around your always on roles is still a very valid place to be as you're moving to the
Seems
cloud.
almost a little unrealistic.
Yeah, it's unrealistic if that's the only thing that you think is good. I know that that can be a, like you said, like a crawl, walk, or run. It can be a goal at some point, but you have to balance that out against everything you're doing to secure your data, and whether or not investments to move from a least privilege model to a JIT model whether those investments are valid as opposed to, say, getting a handle on, say, detection or any other control.
Yeah, I said my perspective was all of them have their place. I don't think everybody has the zero standing privilege infrastructure at hand, but let's assume that someone does. I would say you still don't want to try to use it like a grenade, right? You want to use it like more like a scalpel. Very specific use cases where zero standing privileges make sense. Least privilege, I think, is just another step down from that, where it's like, hey, you're really trying to do your best. I think it's a journey. I don't think it's black and white. It's like, if you're trying to get to least privilege, the closer you can get to that, the better. But then there's certain levels of privilege which the resources are so low risk. It's like a role probably is good enough. Now, the funny thing is when you see most IT security policies, it's like, we're least privilege. All we allow is least privilege. And it's like, yeah, it's nice to say that, but it's not realistic. So I kind of feel like that's like the hierarchy of needs, if you will, is like zero standing where it's absolutely critical based on risk. Least privilege is kind of your in between, where it's still high risk or medium risk, but it's not maybe the highest, and it's also not the lowest. When I think when you're talking low risk things, like throw it in a role, maybe not give it to everybody, but like don't lose sleep over it.
I just want to go back to a zero standing privilege grenade. I think we've stumbled upon a new product here that we can use to really clean up environments. Just chuck that into the cloud.
I just really appreciated your breakdown of the three approaches to IAM, and I'm thinking about the owner role in Google Cloud. Say this is the owner role. Literally every permission, 5,000 of them last I checked, probably maybe even 6,000, assigned at the project level. Your initial blush would be, oh no, could possibly ever assign this ever. There are no scenarios. But then, you have sandbox projects where you say that it's going to be turned off once it hits $50. This is a sandbox account for a developer to do certain things. You've limited the blast radius of this so that, giving them the owner role on this sandbox account to have $50 worth of fun is perfectly acceptable.
Because they can always go back and ask for more money to stop that account.
Yeah.
So other than reading your blog and the GCP 101, what are some other ways that people can really get up to speed on cloud security? I know you and I were talking about some conferences that are coming up. You want to talk about that? Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of the Ford CloudSec conference. It's been going on since 2020 and unfortunately was its inaugural year. So it'll be its 5th year coming up here in June in DC. So this conference, I think there'll be 40 some tracks, everything from, classic builder talks of how do you secure this piece of infrastructure, to open source projects, to we found this crazy hack and it's going to make the news and it's going to make the news here. So it's this really great breadth of the top research. And this will be the first year that there'll be an EU version too. So folks that don't want to make the trip over to the States can find it in Brussels in September. I'll be at both. Come by and say hi. And if you're looking for just some great practical hands-on cloud security, a friend of mine, Rich, put together the SLAW labs, Coleslaw, SLAW. And those are bite-sized pieces of content around AWS and then practical hands-on labs that you can do.
It sounds pretty cool. We focus a lot on identity conferences, and I think this is probably just the natural extension where we start talking about cloud. Cloud's not a fad, right? It's going to stick around for a while. I'm looking to get a ticket for the one in North America, and it says it's sold out.
It sells out in seconds. But I think there is a waiting list. And in the couple days before the conference, people do return tickets. So get on the waiting list. And if you're have the ability to travel relatively last minute, you'll be able to get in.
So this isn't something with cloud security, but I'm on the Eventbrite website and it's, it says sold out. Other events you might like. Shrimp Blast 2024. So obviously it knows me and it's like, hey, this guy likes food.
Yeah, they know you. You must have some cookies on your computer.
Better than shrimp, I guess. I just kind of imagine Kat, like, you're at the conference and there's like, it's like a sporting event, right? Hey, looking for two, cloud security, looking for two, right?
Yeah. I think people have also done some watch parties too. So people who couldn't get tickets, they've done some like offsite watch parties where they will stream the talks. And so you could have a sort of a mini conference feel. Or just come to Brussels. Brussels will be great.
Yeah, that's easy. I love the idea of having like watch parties because one of the things that I run into, and Kat, I don't know if you're the same, but it's like there's too much content sometimes at a conference. And it's like you have to choose. Am I going to go see this thing, watch this thing, or am I going to get stuck in a hallway, talking with somebody because I want to, right? Or something like that. So I love the idea of being able to watch things kind of after the fact. So that's always my recommendation for anybody putting on a conference is have some way for people to like catch up for things. I don't know if you struggle with that same dilemma.
Yeah. I'm all about the hallway con. I mean, I'm lucky if I watch 2 or 3 talks in the whole conference because I'm just catching up with people I haven't seen since the previous year. I think we all end up becoming fast friends. And and so this is our chance to kind of see each other. And then we watch everything on YouTube.
All right. Well, let's start to wrap up this conversation. I'm going to pose a scenario here for us. Jim walked in with a IDAC branded zero standing privilege grenade and chucked it into the cloud, and identity security is done, or it's so screwed up now that you're like, I'm out of here. Like, I'm done. What is it that you're going to do with your life? What is your job, whatever you want to call it, that you're quit and say, I'm out of this. I'm not working on technology.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. The JIT grenade came in. I think my long-standing, I've quit technology job has always been to start a CSA, right? To just, have sort of the intent would be to create a small hobby farm, and it would quickly get out of hand into chicken and goats, and quickly get out of hand, and I'd have to start a CSA because I'd be growing way too many vegetables. And I'm probably just, one small, cloud security issue away from becoming a farmer.
So CSA is community supported agriculture or something else?
Community supported agriculture, yes. And not join a CSA as in receive vegetables, but grow so many vegetables, I have to then sell them to my neighbors.
Yeah, you go to the farmer's market. I mean, hey, come on down to Asheville. Yeah. We got tons of that down here. I'm sure. Yeah. What would be your crop? What are you growing?
Oh, it's always too many tomatoes.
Oh, yeah. We call it summer of tomato whenever they start to bloom here. And then, because my wife is into this as well. I got her a hydroponic garden. So that has really accelerated things. So I got her the fancy one that's like the tall one that has like the different things. And so what she does is she starts them there. And then when they're too big for that, she moves them out into the soil and just is continually growing stuff. So things are starting to appear.
Well, you're lucky with your growing season, where I still have a good 6 weeks until I can plant anything. But I make use of my time.
Well, the problem is the bears then come out and eat it. So
bears.
You have to be concerned about that. Yeah.
Wow, I don't have that issue. I just have squirrels, no bears. Jim, what about you? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to find out what Jim wants to do if he's not doing technology.
Well, first, I want to make a farmer's market comment. I'm more of a buyer than a seller. I like farmers markets, but when I go to one and I see them selling like bananas or, any kind of fruit that can be only grown in like South America, I'm like, no, that's not the point of the farmers market. That's what we have the grocery store for. So I did want to make that comment because that happens a lot, at least here in Georgia. Okay, my rage quit job, or I shouldn't even call it a rage quit job because I'm taking the question a little bit differently. So I throw that grenade, and I'm going to assume the grenade was so successful.
So you admit it.
It actually turned into
this is Exhibit A.
mini fortune.
And this is Exhibit A in the defense. You're admitting it right here.
Yeah, well, I'm only going to do it if it's going to be a winner. So grenade is thrown. I make millions of dollars, and now I can do what I want to do. And I think what I would do, so I took a class in college called sculpting, and it was basically how to create bronze statues. Okay, so most of the projects were much smaller than statues, but I could literally envision how you could build statues or make art, but basically 3D art out of bronze. And I loved that class. I was not a fine arts major or anything, but I feel like I would want to go back and take that to the next level. And I would do it in college because they have all the equipment there. So it costs the same as any other course, but you have access to a bronzing lab. And I mean, like, you're not just going to buy that equipment for yourself. And then the other thing I would do is I'd probably create a YouTube channel, because I think people would be really interested in learning about this and seeing it happen and all that. So that's what I would do. I'd become a sculptor, and I would, create a YouTube channel.
But that's technology, YouTube, which is fine because, hey, whatever. So we got a bronze worker. We've got a farmer, I guess, for keeping it simple. So you guys are looking at skills that are like viable, needed by human beings. And I have none of that. I don't think I could ever get out of technology. This has been who I am forever. Man, if I had to do something that was not technology, I honestly don't know what I would do, because Jim knows I'm constantly tinkering. I mean, I spent the weekend video editing and trying different tools and all kinds of different softwares and stuff like that, trying to work on different things. Like, that's just who I am, is like a technology person. I mean, it would be probably something with the podcast, but podcast is technology. I don't want to be outside because I don't like hot weather. I don't like bugs. I like Wi-Fi. I like air conditioning. So I need to find something that's like inside, and I'm not artistic. So I'm not going to be, the next great sculptor with Jim and his massive bronze structures as testaments to identity at the center in the sky. I'm not growing stuff because that's just not my thing. I don't know what I would do. Do you guys have suggestions? Like, what should I do? Stunned silence.
Without technology, I can't think of anything. I mean, if it was outside of IAM, I could probably come up with like 100 different things you could do. I was actually thinking one thing that you used to really be into was collecting bags so that you could travel with one bag. So I kind of feel like that's one of your areas of expertise.
Hey, now you're talking.
But I think also you have to sell the bags somehow, and who buys bags in person anymore? You buy them on the internet.
Yeah, but you got a YouTube channel. Let's go with this, because that's a good idea. I didn't think about that. I have a affinity for bags, travel bags, other variety things. I'm constantly in a search for the one bag to rule them all. So yeah, I don't know if it's a tailor or something like that, but I feel like I can design the world's greatest, travel bag for me and my purposes. So maybe some sort of custom.
To get everything down to one bag. But you're pretty much there. I mean, but that was your goal for so long, and then you finally achieved it. There's no turning back.
If you're traveling and you're on flights and you can get away with just sticking something under the seat in front of you and you've got everything you need, I got to tell you, it's so freeing. You don't have to worry about overhead space. You can board last. Your stuff doesn't get lost. I mean, I never check a bag, but I do, I'd say 50-50 will have an overhead carry-on or something like that just because of whatever. But yeah, if you can get away with just that one bag fits under the seat, now we're talking, baby.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, they can't lose that.
No. The quest continues. I do have a lot of bags. It's kind of hard to see, but this is just a small sampling. I was looking at here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, probably another closet full of another 30. And I'm constantly rotating stuff out. The quest continues. Kat is like shocked. She's like, who is this nerd and what did I get
No,
myself into?
I can't wait to ask you for Rex. I need some advice. I've got a very important gentleman birthday coming up soon who also is obsessed with bags.
Okay.
But he's really into one very specific brand, and I want to kind of like float that by you.
Okay. Yes, we will talk about that. I am
But no
connoisseur.
unpaid sponsorships. I'm going to keep
No,
that,
I would love to be
on a side
sponsored
note.
by, and these bags are expensive. I mean, they're anywhere, like a good bag is anywhere between $200 and $700. Now, these are bags you buy at once and you should be good. And unless you're like me and you find like the smallest tiny detail that nobody in their right mind would care about, but I do. And then the quest continues. But anyway, let's talk about that offline. Let's go ahead and wrap it up for this week. Kat, thank you so much for being part of this. We're going to try and get dinner next time in the Minneapolis area here in a couple of weeks. I'm looking forward to that. I will have links in our show notes to your blog around GCP 101 series. Also have a link to TrustOnCloud, trustoncloud.com. So be able to check out what you do over there, as well as links to the Forward CloudSec conference so that people can either get on the waiting list or, maybe just hang out on the street and, looking for two. And with that, we'll go ahead and leave it. So thanks everyone for listening. You can find us on the web, idacpodcast.com, on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at IDAC Podcast, and on Mastodon at IDAC Podcast at infosec.exchange. Send Jim and I a note.
And YouTube.
Yeah, we're still working on the YouTube channel, so more to come on that. And yeah, connect with us on LinkedIn, like, subscribe, do all those fun, social things to help us grow the show. And thanks for listening. We'll talk to everybody in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com and find us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. See you next time on Identity at the Center.